What if one of the oldest wealth-building assets on Earth is something you can still buy, develop, rent, and profit from today? You can manufacture a car, you can build a company, you can create an app, you can print money, but you cannot manufacture another acre of Manhattan, another piece of waterfront in Miami, another strategically located parcel beside a growing highway, or another piece of land in the path of a city's expansion. That is what makes land fundamentally different. Land is one of the original factors of production because it is a natural resource that exists independently of human manufacturing. Human beings did not create the earth beneath their feet. What we have learned to do is transform its economic usefulness. A farmer turns land into food, a developer turns land into housing, a warehouse operator turns land into logistics infrastructure, a landlord turns land and buildings into recurring rental income. A parking operator turns unused pavement into cash flow, and an investor can sometimes buy land before an area becomes valuable and sell it after economic development changes what that land is worth. This is the fundamental idea behind getting rich through land. The U.S. land market is enormous. Realtor.com's 2026 analysis found that advertised raw land prices had risen roughly 77% between early 2019 and March 2026, although land markets vary enormously by location and property type. And that variation is exactly where opportunity and risk comes from. In this video, we're revealing 7 powerful ways to get rich through land, from simply buying and holding land for future appreciation to turning it into a cash flow producing business. And by the end, you'll understand why smart investors don't just ask, how much is this land worth? They ask, how much money can this land produce? 1. Land banking. Buy today, wait for tomorrow. Have you ever bought something today because you believed it would be worth much more tomorrow? Maybe you bought a stock, maybe a piece of equipment. Or perhaps you bought something during a sale and told yourself, I'm saving money, only to discover 3 months later that you haven't even used it. Well, land banking takes that idea and stretches it over several years. Land banking is simply buying land in an area you believe is going to become more valuable in the future, and then having the patience to wait. You might discover a parcel on the outskirts of a growing American city. Today, there may be nothing exciting around it. Just grass, dirt, maybe a few cows wondering why you are staring at their future neighborhood. But then you notice something. A new highway is being planned. New homes are being constructed nearby. Businesses are moving into the area. Population is growing. Perhaps a hospital, university, shopping center, airport, or industrial park is coming. Suddenly, that piece of nothing doesn't look so much like nothing anymore. You bought the land before the development arrived. Let's use a simple example. Suppose you purchase land for $100,000 and 5 years later sell it for $160,000. Congratulations, you made a $60,000 capital gain before taxes and transaction costs. But here's the question I want you to think about. What did that $100,000 do for you during those 5 years? Did it pay you rent every month? Did it send you a Christmas bonus? Did it deposit $500 into your bank account every Friday? Probably not. Your money was sitting there patiently, just like you were. And that's the biggest strength and weakness of land banking. You don't have tenants calling you at 2 a.m. because the toilet is leaking. You don't have to replace a roof. You don't have to manage employees, but you need patience. If the land grows from $100,000 to $125,000 in 5 years, your annualized appreciation is only about 4.6% before expenses. So ask yourself, can I afford to lock up my money for 5, 10, or even 15 years? If the answer is yes, land banking can be powerful. But if you need monthly income, there are better land strategies. Because with land banking, you're essentially telling your money, go sit in the corner. I'll call you when the neighborhood arrives. And sometimes that neighborhood takes a very, very long time to arrive. 2. Land rental. Make the land pay you while you own it. Now, what if you could own a piece of land and make that land pay you while you wait for its value to increase? That is where land rental becomes interesting. Remember land banking? You buy the land, sit back, and wait for development to arrive. Land rental says, why should I just wait for my land to become valuable when someone is willing to pay me to use it today? And honestly, that's a much more interesting question. Think about a large parcel of land sitting unused on the edge of a growing American city. You could leave it untouched for 10 years, hoping the surrounding area develops. Or you could lease it. Maybe a farmer wants to use it for agriculture. Maybe a contractor needs somewhere to store construction equipment. Maybe a business needs outdoor storage. Maybe an event company wants temporary space. Maybe RV owners need somewhere to park those giant homes on wheels that somehow become smaller houses the moment they enter a storage facility. The principle is simple. You own the land. Someone else pays for the right to use it. And here's where land rental has an advantage over land banking. With land banking, your primary reward comes when you eventually sell. With land rental, you can potentially receive recurring income while still retaining ownership of the underlying asset. For example, USDA data puts average U.S. cropland cash rent at roughly $161 per acre in 2025. Imagine you own 100 acres. At that national average, you could potentially generate about 100 to 161 or $1,100 per year. That's roughly $1,342 per month in gross rental income before taxes and other expenses. And remember, this is just an agricultural example. Land in a strategically located urban or suburban area could potentially command much higher rents for uses such as parking, storage, commercial activities, or other permitted purposes. Now let me ask you something. Would you rather own land that simply sits there or land that sends you a check? That's the beauty of productive land. You're potentially getting two opportunities from one asset. Income today, appreciation tomorrow. But don't get too excited and start buying every empty field you see. Location matters enormously. You need to understand zoning, accessibility, demand, taxes, environmental restrictions, infrastructure, and what activities are legally permitted on the property. A beautiful 20-acre parcel in the middle of nowhere might look cheap, but if nobody wants to rent it, cheap land can become an expensive mistake. The smartest land investors therefore don't simply ask, how much land can I buy? They ask, who will pay me to use this land? Because land becomes much more powerful when it doesn't just sit there looking beautiful, but starts working for you. 3. Property development. Create value where value didn't exist before. Now we come to a completely different way of making money from land. Property development. This is where you stop asking, how much will this land be worth someday? And start asking, what can I build here that people desperately need? And that question changes everything. Because raw land by itself may have limited usefulness. But when you combine that land with capital, knowledge, planning, construction, and creativity, you can transform it into something far more valuable. Think about it. A piece of land doesn't have a kitchen. It doesn't have bedrooms. It doesn't have shops. It doesn't have offices. It doesn't have parking spaces. It doesn't have a roof. But a developer can take that empty piece of land and create all of these things. And that is the fundamental principle behind property development. You create value by transforming land into something people are willing to pay more to own or use. A developer might build a residential estate, shopping center, office complex, warehouse, hotel, mixed-use development, or even a recreational facility. But here's the exciting part. You aren't necessarily waiting for someone else to make the land valuable. You are participating in the process of making it valuable. That's why development can potentially produce much greater returns than simply buying and holding land. But, and this is a very big but, property development is not a magic money machine. You need money, and sometimes you need a lot of it. You have to deal with architects, engineers, contractors, permits, zoning regulations, financing, construction costs, insurance, taxes, and countless unexpected expenses. And if you have ever renovated a house, you already know the famous rule of construction. Whatever you budgeted for, prepare to spend more. A developer also has to understand the market. Building a beautiful luxury property doesn't help much if the people in that location cannot afford it. You could construct the most magnificent shopping center in the city, but if nobody wants to shop there, congratulations. You have successfully built an expensive monument to poor market research. That's why successful development begins before construction. You must understand the location. Who lives there? What do they need? What can they afford? What businesses are moving in? What is the population doing? What does zoning allow? And most importantly, will people actually pay for what I am about to build? Property development, therefore, has a major advantage over land banking. Land banking depends heavily on time and appreciation. Development attempts to create value through action and transformation, but that greater potential comes with greater risk. You need capital, knowledge, patience, and excellent execution. So remember this, land gives you the foundation, but development gives the land a purpose. And when you learn how to identify what people need and transform land into the solution, you are no longer simply investing in dirt. You are creating economic value. Number 4, rental real estate. Turn land into a cash flow machine. Now let's talk about one of the most familiar and potentially powerful ways to turn land into wealth, rental real estate. Most people look at a house and see walls, windows, doors, and a roof. But a smart real estate investor sees something different. They see an income-producing asset sitting on land. And that distinction is important because when you build residential or commercial property on land and rent it to other people, you're potentially creating something that can generate income month after month, year after year. Think about what happens when someone rents an apartment. They need somewhere to live. The business owner needs somewhere to operate. The retailer needs somewhere to sell. The warehouse operator needs somewhere to store goods. And every one of those activities requires something that humans cannot manufacture more of, a physical location. That's where land becomes powerful. Rental real estate can potentially give you 2 engines of wealth at the same time. The first is cash flow. Your tenants pay rent, and after expenses, financing, and other costs, you may have money left over. The second is appreciation. If the property and surrounding area become more valuable over time, your asset may appreciate. So you're potentially getting paid while you wait. And unlike land banking, where your property might sit quietly for years, rental real estate can have a job every single month. But here's the catch. Tenants are not always as peaceful as the land. The land doesn't call you at midnight. The land doesn't tell you the air conditioner stopped working. The land doesn't lose its keys. The land doesn't leave dishes in the sink. Your tenants might. And that's why rental real estate isn't completely passive. You may have maintenance, repairs, vacancies, property taxes, insurance, management fees, and unexpected expenses. A roof doesn't care that you had a particularly difficult month financially. When it needs replacing, it needs replacing. But despite these challenges, rental property has a major advantage. It can turn an appreciating physical asset into a recurring income-producing business. And there is another fascinating concept. When a property generates reliable income, that income can influence how investors value the property. So, improving the property's ability to generate income can potentially increase its market value. That means a smart landlord isn't only thinking, how much rent am I collecting? They are also thinking, how can I make this property more valuable and more productive? Better management, better tenants, better occupancy, useful improvements, controlled expenses, these things can make a difference. But rental real estate requires more capital and responsibility than simply buying vacant land. You need to understand financing, location, tenant demand, property management, and the economics of the neighborhood. So here's the big lesson. Land is the foundation. The building is the product. Rent is the cash flow. And appreciation can become the long-term wealth engine. That's why rental real estate can be so powerful. You're not just owning property. You're building an asset that potentially pays you while you own it. 5. Parking and vehicle storage. Turn empty land into cash flow. Here is a land investment strategy that many people overlook because it doesn't look as glamorous as an apartment building or skyscraper. Parking. Yes, parking. You might be thinking, wait a minute, we're talking about getting rich through land and you're telling me to rent parking spaces? Exactly. Because sometimes the smartest way to make money from land isn't to build something enormous. Sometimes you simply need to recognize a problem. People have cars, but they don't have enough places to put them. And wherever there is a shortage of parking, land can become extremely valuable. Think about land near airports, hospitals, universities, stadiums, downtown business districts, entertainment venues, and busy commercial areas. The land doesn't necessarily need to become a 30-story building. It can become a place where people pay for the privilege of leaving their vehicle. And here's the interesting part. You're monetizing location. People aren't really paying you because they love your piece of asphalt. They are paying because your land is conveniently located. That's the secret. A parking space beside a busy airport can be worth far more economically than a much larger piece of land sitting hours away from the nearest major activity. So ask yourself, what are people willing to pay for convenience? Sometimes the answer is surprisingly high. Parking can also have another advantage over traditional property development. You may not need to construct apartments, kitchens, bathrooms, and multiple floors. Depending on the location and local regulations, you may need relatively straightforward improvements such as paving, drainage, lighting, security, and access control. That potentially means a lower level of construction complexity than a conventional building. But don't mistake simpler for easy. You still have to deal with zoning, permits, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, security, and competition. And there is another challenge: occupancy. A parking lot with 200 spaces doesn't make you money simply because 200 spaces exist. Those spaces need customers. You could own the world's most beautiful parking lot, but if nobody parks there, congratulations, you've created a very expensive outdoor museum for empty cars. That's why location and demand are everything. You need to understand traffic patterns, nearby businesses, parking shortages, public transportation, events, local development, and what people are willing to pay. And here's the big advantage over land banking. Land banking waits for future value. Parking attempts to monetize today's demand. You can potentially generate recurring income while continuing to own the underlying land. And if the surrounding area becomes even more valuable, you could potentially benefit from appreciation as well. So remember this: don't underestimate boring businesses. Sometimes the path to wealth isn't a glamorous skyscraper. Sometimes it's simply owning the piece of land where everyone else desperately wants to park. Because when people say, "Where am I going to park?" a smart landowner might hear, "Where can I invest?" 6. Industrial and warehouse land. Own the land behind the supply chain. Here's a question you probably don't think about when you order something online. Where was that product sitting before it arrived at your front door? Before your package reaches you, it may have traveled through factories, warehouses, distribution centers, trucking facilities, and logistics hubs. And behind almost every stage of that journey is something very simple: land. This is why industrial and warehouse real estate can be such an interesting way to build wealth through land. A warehouse may not look as exciting as a luxury apartment or downtown skyscraper. But don't let the boring appearance fool you. Boring can make money. Businesses need somewhere to store inventory. Manufacturers need somewhere to operate. Distributors need somewhere to move products. Trucking companies need yards. E-commerce companies need fulfillment centers. And all of these activities require physical space. That creates an opportunity for the landowner. You acquire strategically located land and develop it, or partner with someone to develop it, into a warehouse, distribution center, industrial facility, or outdoor storage operation. Then, businesses pay to use that space. And here's what makes the strategy particularly interesting. You're not depending entirely on ordinary consumers. A residential landlord depends on people needing somewhere to live. An industrial landlord may have businesses paying for space because that location is connected to their entire operation. Think about a warehouse beside a major highway. Now compare that with an identical warehouse located in the middle of nowhere. Same building, similar walls, similar roof, but completely different economic value. Why? Location. A warehouse near highways, ports, airports, rail lines, and major population centers can potentially provide businesses with something extremely valuable: efficiency. And businesses will often pay for efficiency because saving time and transportation costs can directly affect their bottom line. But here's where investors need to be careful. Don't hear the words warehouse and immediately start shopping for industrial land. The industrial market can experience oversupply, vacancies, and changing demand. A beautifully constructed warehouse without a suitable tenant can become a very expensive empty box. And unlike residential property, converting industrial property to another use may not always be simple. That's why successful investors ask questions before buying. Who are the potential tenants? What industries are growing here? How close is the property to transportation infrastructure? What does zoning permit? Is there sufficient labor nearby? Is the local industrial market growing or becoming oversupplied? These questions matter because industrial land isn't valuable simply because it's big. It's valuable when it sits where businesses need to be. And that's the big lesson. Land is not just about acreage. It is about location, access, and economic activity. The person who owns the land behind the warehouse may never touch a single package, but every package moving through that facility can remind them of one powerful truth. You don't always have to sell the product to make money from commerce. Sometimes you can own the land commerce depends on. 7. Self-storage, RV and outdoor storage. Now let's talk about a land strategy that solves a very simple problem. People have too much stuff and not enough space. Think about it. The garage is full. The basement is full. The spare bedroom has become a storage room. And somehow that treadmill nobody has used since January is still there. Americans accumulate possessions, furniture, business equipment, seasonal decorations, boats, vehicles, recreational equipment, and countless other things. But eventually, people run out of room. That's where self-storage and outdoor storage come in. Instead of building traditional houses or offices, a landowner can potentially transform appropriately zoned land into storage space that people pay to use. And this is an interesting business because you're essentially selling something very simple. Space. You aren't selling the customer's belongings. You aren't manufacturing anything. You're simply providing them with somewhere to put the things they don't want to throw away, but don't have room to keep. And that creates potentially recurring revenue. Self-storage can include individual storage units, while outdoor storage can accommodate larger items such as RVs, boats, trailers, commercial vehicles, and construction equipment. The business model is particularly interesting because customers can pay monthly for access to space. And unlike an apartment, you aren't providing a kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, or living room. The customer doesn't expect luxury. They basically want 4 things: space, security, accessibility, and preferably a gate that actually works. But here's where the land investor needs to think carefully. Not every piece of vacant land can become a storage facility. You need to investigate zoning, permits, drainage, environmental restrictions, road access, utilities, security requirements, and local demand. And most importantly, who needs storage in this particular location? A storage facility surrounded by growing neighborhoods could have a completely different business potential from one sitting far away from population centers. Population growth is particularly important because more households and businesses can mean more demand for additional space. But competition matters too. If 5 storage facilities already operate within a few miles and all of them have empty units, building a 6th one may not be the smartest investment decision. This brings us to one of the biggest advantages of storage compared with land banking. With land banking, you are essentially waiting for somebody else to create demand around your property. With storage, you are attempting to monetize an existing demand for space, and that's powerful. You can potentially generate recurring income while still owning the underlying land. Then, if the surrounding community grows and the land becomes more valuable, you may potentially benefit from appreciation as well. So here's the big idea. Don't just ask whether land is valuable. Ask what problem the land can solve. If people need somewhere to live, build housing. If businesses need somewhere to operate, build commercial space. If companies need somewhere to store equipment, provide storage. And if Americans simply have too much stuff, well, congratulations. Their clutter may become your cash flow. Here's the lesson I want you to remember. Never ask only, how much is this land worth today? Ask, what could this land become? The investor's real job is not simply to buy dirt. It is to understand location, zoning, infrastructure, population growth, employment, transportation, demand, financing, and future land use. Because land itself doesn't produce wealth automatically. Human demand produces the economic value of land, and the person who understands where that demand is going before everyone else arrives may have the opportunity to buy the land before the price fully reflects its future potential. That is why land has remained one of the most fascinating wealth-building assets throughout human history. We did not create it, but with knowledge, capital, patience, and entrepreneurship, we can transform it into something that produces income, appreciation, businesses, housing, and generational wealth. And perhaps the most powerful thing about land is this. Buildings get old, businesses fail, technology becomes obsolete. But strategically located land can continue serving human needs for generations. The question isn't simply, do you own land? The better question is, do you understand how to make the land you own productive? Now I'm curious, which of these 7 land strategies would you consider using to build wealth? Leave your answer in the comments, and if you found this video valuable, like, subscribe to Street Smart Secrets, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next wealth building lesson.